Peace and love, family. Welcome to another Read Book Club discussion. Tonight we are discussing chapter 4 of They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Masters in the American South by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. I am your host, Dr. Ma'at, and I have with me my co-host, Brother T, and a panel of students, okay? All right, and so I'm going to let everyone introduce himself and herself to the listening audience.
Hey family, how you doing? I'm Brother T, known as Brother T Wolo. This is my third or fourth book with the Read Book Club. I'm pretty excited about tonight's chapter 4. Dr. Ma'at always finds a colorful way to name the chapter, so I hope if you haven't clicked on it already, send it out to some friends so we all can enjoy tonight's discussion.
Hi, my name is Marcia Pender. I am the teacher for the children that are up here at this moment. We have an Afrocentric homeschool. All these children are mine. Two of them are, one of them is not, but I try to help and facilitate other parents who want to homeschool their kids and make it doable by trying to do it as a tribal type thing. And I just kind of fill in some gaps for parents who can't homeschool full time.
My name is Tam Pinder. I'm the middle kid to Miss Marcia, and I hope you guys find this book club enlightening.
My name is Jacinta. I'm 15. I do school with Miss Marcia. Today I'm pretty just excited to learn from everybody else what they thought about this chapter, and yeah.
Hi, my name is William Pender. I am 15 years old also, and I'm really just excited to talk about the book.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Family, take a moment out right now to thumb up this video, And as Brother T just told you, share this video. We're going to be dropping a lot of information tonight. And there may be some folks who don't have the book. That's fine. Didn't read the chapter. That's fine. But still participate in the discussion because you will learn something. William, you gotta cut your camera on, man. But you will learn something. So make sure
to grab something. I think he's having some internet issues.
Oh, okay. So yeah, family. So make sure that you share. Sharing is caring. Thumb up the video and share. I was live the other day, and shout out to Sister Curl. We were live and we were talking about parenting. Matter of fact, I was live with Baba Imhotep, and the title of the discussion was "We Don't Talk About This Enough." And so, what it means to parent, what does that mean? And we broke that down. And Sister Curl said, "I sent your broadcast to 25 people." And I actually saw, Brother T, the numbers just shoot up. And I was, I know other people were sharing, but she alone sent it. She literally sent the link out to 25 people. And so, family, send the link out. If you're on Facebook, post the link. If you're on, let me take him out until he gets back. If you're on Facebook, post the link. And if you're on Twitter, tweet the link. Let folks know that we're live. And let's get the information out. We live in this internet age where, misinformation and disinformation is literally saturating the internet. It's everywhere. And so, we want to make sure that the information is getting out, to the people. The correct information is getting out to the people. Our people are inundated with misinformation and disinformation, and we need to combat that. Okay. So help us get this out. Also, family, and let me share my screen. I have created, here it is. I've created 2 new playlists on my channel. So this is the Read Book Club playlist right here. And this is Peace and Love, family. Welcome. I hear it in my ear. And so this is the Read Book Club discussions that we've had on this book so far. And so I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Okay. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. All right. So make sure if you miss some discussions, come back over here. Okay. Let me see if I can. What's this? That says loop playlist, shuffle playlist. All right. Let me grab the link. Let me just go here. It was all right. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Okay. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. So if you miss some discussions, make sure that you go back and that you check them out. And so we've had tonight is our fifth discussion. Our first discussion was the introduction, entitled 40% of white women were slave masters. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. When we think about slave masters, we typically think about white men. And so in the introduction to this book, I think Dr. Rogers did a great job driving home the fact that 40%, over 40% of white women were slave masters. In chapter 1, she talks about how they were groomed, to be slave masters, and not even just white women, but white men as well. Since they were children, they grew up in slaveholding households where they watched their parents, buy and sell enslaved people and managed enslaved people. Okay. And so then our third discussion was called Antebellum Southern Households Were Not as Patriarchal as We Believe or Thought, right? And so during that particular discussion, we talked about, the book talked about, and we also discussed how, white folks will, um, the image that they project of their families. You would think that it was hierarchical, right, where the man was the head and the woman was submissive and feminine, and feminine, submissive, and the man kind of took control. But what we learned is that what we learned was that they existed in what they call a hierarchy or hierarchical families where power was shared between all of them. Okay. And then last week I had to hold down the fort. We were laughing about that backstage because everybody had something going on. I know that the youth, they were doing, I think, a robotics contest, and all kinds of stuff was going on. And Brother T said, I got to catch up on some rest because his business is booming and he's working. And so it was just a lot going on last week. And so anyway, I held down the fort and I talked about chapter, I think it was chapter 3. And I spoke on the details I learned in chapter 3. I entitled that discussion, White Female Slave Masters Were Just as Brutal as Their Male Counterparts. And so in that particular chapter, Dr. Rogers spoke about the strategies that white women employed to manage their enslaved persons. And so tonight, I titled the discussion, Karen was never innocent. She was never innocent. And the reason why I titled that, well, you'll learn it. You'll get to it. Brother T, go ahead and start it off for us. We'll get to it.
Beautiful breakdown, Dr. Ma'at. One thing I've learned from reading this chapter is that the mistress had one hell of a network.
Mm.
And if you just jump the couple pages, if you go through the couple pages that we'll be discussing here, you learn just how intricate her network was. They talked about in this opening page on chapter 4 that business was conducted even before they left the house, to understand exactly what she needed in an enslaved ancestor. She had a network so intricate that she had people close to her that could teach her. That was her school. Her uncle, and based off this first page, her uncle farm was her schoolyard. This is where she learned how to buy slaves. This is how she learned how to pick out skilled enslaved ancestors. She learned everything she needed to learn. And I'm gonna read one of the pages, a couple of the synthesis on this chapter, if I could. Chapter 4 started off with Martha J. Jones. Talked about her being a young white girl living in the upper western region of Virginia. When she acquired extensive knowledge about slave market and trade, her family's slave dealings, her brother was her teacher, and his farms served as her school. This is what I mentioned earlier. So Martha Jones not only knew secondhand knowledge that her uncle John C. Turner would buy, sell, and trade slaves all the time. She witnessed him engaging in these activities herself. During her childhood, she would visit her uncle and watch him swap and buy slaves, just as the same as he was buying other stock for the farm. So, as I mentioned earlier, this was an extensive and very intricate, hands-on understanding of how to do slaves. As we learned in other chapters, we learned about the Panic of 1837. That's what was mentioned in chapter 3. We got to understand the climate of this era. A lot of things were shutting down. Businesses were closing. Husbands were losing their wealth by because businesses were shutting down because of the stock market and everything that was happening in 1837. So at that time, mistress was learning to protect their own property. They were going through the courts, getting things signed so they can protect their wealth. Up until this point that we are seeing right now in chapter 4, now they it's being known that they learned this at a young age. It didn't really mention that too intricate in chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3, but as we know, the business of the mistress is being developed right then and now, and you'll see later on in this chapter it's just how intricate her business dealings were.
No, absolutely. And brother T, I'm gonna be honest. When you talked about the panic of 1837,
Mm-hmm.
and you said that businesses are closing down, and the stock market was in shambles, I'm thinking about what's happening now. Like
What's happening
yeah,
now?
in 2023,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of businesses are closing. We're dealing with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
I've been seeing a lot of things circulate regarding the U.S. dollar. They said a lot of countries are saying, "Hey, we're no longer going to trade in the U.S. dollars." So people are saying, "Well, that's going to impact inflation." So they're saying inflation is going to get worse.
That's right.
And so I'm actually in the process of getting in touch with an economist to bring
Mm-hmm.
him on to talk about the state of the U.S. dollar. I
Yes, sir.
don't think we really understand how, if these countries continue to say we're no longer going to use the U.S. dollar, then that means the value of the dollar is going to depreciate. And
We'll
if
find
that
out in June.
happens, yeah, you say what? You said what?
We'll find out a
We'll
lot in
find,
June.
yeah, we'll find out a lot in June. And then so if that happens, I don't think that people understand how that's going to impact, our economy here. And so anyway, when you were talking, I was sitting over here thinking like, damn, 1837, that sounds like 2023. It sounds like
So
what we going through right now.
when she mentioned this in that chapter, that's why I brought it up. That's why it was a hurry for that mistress to protect her property because everybody was losing things at that time. So she was putting things in place to say, if my husband loses his, I want to make sure I hold on to mine. So things were put into place, laws were put into place, the Women's Suffrage Acts, so they can start to gain more of their property and can vote on protecting their property so they don't have to worry about the backhand deals that we're doing that we learned about in chapter 1 to 3.
Absolutely. And so when we move on, and thank you so much, Brother T, for that beautiful introduction. When we move forward, at the top of page 82, and I'm just going to read this first sentence, and I want one of the young folks to read the second paragraph where it says formerly enslaved people. But I want to say this first. It says right here, top of page 82, most commonly, historians see the slave market as a masculine place, a domain in which, a domain in which white women did not belong. White women wanted to buy or sell a slave. They found ways to participate in the market without going to the marketplace, such as through instructions given in a letter or arguments made in a parlor and parlor discussions. I'm sorry, y'all. I can't even let me cut this light up so I can see better. Parlor discussions. All right. And so, anyway, again, this sentence alone, and they saying this is what historians believe, right? And this is what they put in textbooks. Oh, white women, the slave market was masculine. White women didn't go there. They didn't get their hands dirty, right? And you actually see that in movies that depict slavery. You see a lot of men. It's very male dominated. You may see one or two women in the crowd, but it was very white male dominated place. All right. But we find out that that was far from the truth. So at the bottom of page 82, or the second paragraph on page 82, where it says formerly enslaved people, we learned that that wasn't the case. So could one of the young people read that particular paragraph, starting with and read the whole thing. Formerly enslaved people frequently spoke about.
I can read it.
All right.
Formerly, formerly enslaved people frequently spoke about the more expensive slave market. For them, the slave market was a mobile, spatially unbounded economic network that connected urban commercial districts to plantation estates and incorporated boarding houses, rural pathways, urban streets, taverns, and coffee shops, as well as holding pens and auction houses. They also saw holding households, their porches, kitchens, dining rooms, and bedrooms, and the fields and the quarters, along with the pathways and roads surrounding them as fundamental parts of the slave market. In all these places, slave-owning women orchestrated the sale and purchase of enslaved people. Not only did slave-owning women participate in the public haggling over black bodies in the slave pen, the slave yard, and the auction block, they frequently subjected enslaved people to the terror of the slave market in the privacy of their homes. While
I mean,
slave
so
traders,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
while slave traders, auctioneers, and brokers prepared enslaved people for sale by the sides of the country roads in the southern auction houses and in slave trading establishments. White women talked with their friends and family members about the labor needs and their desire to buy or sell enslaved men, women, and children. They were often able to fulfill their desire without visiting a brick and mortar marketplace because this process often took place or at least began in their homes.
In the homes. That's where it started. The sale of African people occurred in these folks' homes. Okay. Typically, when they show slavery, they always show somebody on the auction block, and it's, hey, what do you do? You want to got it out of here. It wasn't that. No, it was, as the young brother read, it was everywhere. It says it incorporated boarding houses, rural pathways. They were in the streets, they were in the taverns, coffee shops, as well as holding pens and auction houses. So that's why initially I was going to title this discussion, the slave market was everywhere and included everyone, right? Because that's the reality of it. And these men, the people who were involved in slave trading, they didn't hide it from anybody. They didn't hide it from their wives. They didn't hide it from their children. They didn't hide it from anyone. In fact, if you go to the next page, I was it's I was sick to my stomach when I read what happened to one of our ancestors. She was summoned to the room of a slave master, and I know my internet's probably cutting out, but she was summoned to the bedroom of a slave master, and he summoned her in the presence of his wife and his children. And they said that she stayed in his bedroom all night. He told his wife, look, I don't want to share the bed with you tonight. I'm going to go somewhere else. Right? Went into his room, or a separate room, summoned an enslaved woman who stayed the night with him. So all of this stuff was done. They didn't care. They did it in front of each other. Brother T, did you want to say something? I saw your hand go up.
No, sister, I was agreeing with you when I read that. I was amazed that he was that bold to do that in front of his wife and family, and that was allowed because I think later on in this chapter they talk about that they believed that he fathered the children, but it was like an unwritten rule. It's something was silenced. She didn't really say that was his children. The wife just noticed that these enslaved ancestors had children that were fair. So it was like this happened. I'm sure thousands of times. It was just shocking to see it in these pages.
Well, absolutely. And then at the bottom it says that the argument that white Southern women, were alienated from the slave markets and immune to, the mechanisms of the trade seems far-fetched in the face of the ubiquity of slave traders and speculators in their business in urban and rural landscapes, as well as in private homes. White slave owning women frequently did not need to go to the slave market because the slave market came to them. All right. And so they talk about that. Does anyone want to pick up with page 84? Because I can keep rolling, but I want to give other people a chance to jump in. What did you take away from page 84? Mm-hmm.
So when reading this, I hope everybody can hear me and stuff. Our mic isn't great. But in reading all this, a question posed into my mind about how slavery is portrayed and like how they shift the blame to white men, which clearly they played a part in this as well. The things that they did were horrible as well. But since I know that white people tend to shift the blame a lot on people besides who the main perpetrator were, why don't you think that they tried to shift the blame to the white women and they never talk about this stuff? Like, because to me, that would almost all, make sense. They'd be like, oh, well, they did this too. And that would make sense for why they are sexist towards women. They're like, when given power, this is what they do.
Well, that's a good question.
Really good question.
I believe, in my opinion, is that the white man do not want to seem emasculated. So, of course, he would see that he is the head and his woman follows, and that he's masculine and she's feminine. If anything would have came out that she is better with the books, better with the business, better with taking care of the kids and taking care of the home, and he was a degenerate, it would not put him into place in the society as he deems. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I actually I actually agree with that. Sister Marcia?
Yeah, I think in this moment is when I realized, I think while we may not know as much as we should know on this topic as far as, white women's roles in slavery, is because if the slave market came to her, I just don't know if the historical aspect of it, like it being on the books, like if you got to physically go to a slave auction, like that's documented. I just don't know how much it was documented if people came to these homes and if they were smart enough to not go to the brick and mortar slave auctions and they could just conduct this privately in their homes. I mean, they can kind of keep their name out of history with their role in it because it's not even really documented, probably.
Absolutely. And Dr. Rogers actually said what you said. She made that point that's why a lot of those sales, like you said, that, she said, we'll never know how many, like you just said, we'll never know how many women actually did participate because, like you said, they may have been smart enough to say, okay, I don't want my name in that record as owning people. You know what I mean? May have been, forward thinking women at that particular time. So she goes on to talk about slave owning women and how at times they employed people to act as proxies, right? So they may have employed men or they may have employed other women to serve as their agents and attorney in fact, right? So it says relying on proxies was a common practice among slave owning men as well. So slave owning men and slave owning women, sometimes none of them, like you said, Sister Marcia, they tried to distance themselves from the marketplace. And they may have sent an agent or, a proxy. And it says that, sometimes women were appointed as proxies, and sometimes men appointed women who were not married to them as their agents and attorneys, in fact. So at the bottom, it says, while many slave owning men established business relationships with men whom they did not consider kin, friends, and even social equals, white slave owning women's business relationships were generally made with male kin and family friends, right? It says the relationship between factors and their male clients can help elucidate how women's business arrangements function. So when you think about this, they're saying that typically white men, when they went out there and they did business with whomever. But women tended to do business, those white women did business with their male kin. But it makes a lot of sense, right, Sister Marcia? Because, you know, as women, we wanted to be covered and we wanted a layer of protection, right? And so doing business with your brother or your uncle versus doing business with Joe Blow, who's looking at you. Oh, this is a female. I could take advantage. And we still go. The sad part is we still go through that today, Sister Marcia. Sometimes you'll say, you know what? Instead of me going to the mechanics, that mechanic shop to get my car looked at, I'll send my brother or my husband or my boyfriend. I'll send him there because I already know if I go over there, the mechanic is going to probably tell me something is wrong, charge me double price for the parts. So let me go send a man to go do the business for me. So when I was reading this, Sister Marcy, I said, wow, this is what we're doing today. But white women were doing that back in the day. Say, you know what? I'll just do business with my kinfolks, or I'll send a man in my place to go down to the slave auction or the market to conduct business on my behalf. Because at the end of the day, we do live in a patriarchal society, regardless of whether women are running things and doing things. That's the reality. And I think that these white women understood that. So you all, somebody already, if anyone wants to chime in, you have the floor. No one wants to chime in? Okay. Go ahead, William.
Something that I just want to briefly add was that women are definitely very thought out in what they do, whether it's like, as you said, sending your husband to go to the mechanics and stuff, or bribing people to do things for them. Women are very well thought out in what they say, and it's very a little scary on how easy it is for them to just manipulate and like guide us and use us kind of. It's a little scary.
Okay, William said, I'm going to keep it a buck. Brother T, did you want to add?
I remember when when we first started this book, he made a mention when we started the chapter. He said that reading this chapter, I realized how um, important and how strong women were, based off of all the duties that they had. Um, Even though I take what you mentioned, Dr. Ma'at, to be true, women do have to have a proxy for certain things. These women were pretty cunning.
Yeah, they were.
They knew the trade very well, based off of what we mentioned so far. They talked about this in their home, their dinner table. They talked about this with relatives. They had friends, family members that can assist them. So even if, and if I'm not mistaken, in this chapter, please someone correct me if I'm wrong. In this chapter, they talked about being cunning and being shrewd in business, so they couldn't be taken advantage of because they had a true understanding of how things should be. And later on in the chapter, and I'm sure we'll touch bases, she knew how much her enslaved ancestors were worth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So she couldn't be too tricked because she was very aware. And I think that came from her intricate network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to add, I'm moving to page 86. I just want to add that Dr. Rogers drives home that these men who did business on behalf of, like, the women in their family, they took it serious. But I wasn't surprised, Brother T, because it's a connection there. So they didn't feel like, oh, it's just this chick I'm doing. You know what I mean? It was a connection there. These were their mothers, their aunties, their sisters, their wives. And so she says in the middle of, page 86, there was a letter that was written between, two siblings. Well, actually, a woman who employed her brother-in-law to do some business for her. Her name was Elizabeth Guy, and the brother-in-law, his name was John A. Burrell. And it says their correspondence demonstrates that men generally took their responsibilities to their female kin seriously, and their relationship with women were much like those between factors and clients. So we talking about those proxies. It says who were not related by blood or marriage. It says in his report about her slaves' well-being and their earnings, Burrell wrote with business-like formality, explaining every delay and possible discrepancy in the woman's financial affairs. So he took that serious. Those men who conducted business for the women and their families. So on page 87, she moves the discussion into how some women avoided. It says some women avoided. It says these kinds of encounters by relying on the network. So this is what you were talking about, Brother T. Just that these white women had a network that they could utilize in order to buy and sell enslaved people, and how they were protected by that network. But there were times when, they were taken advantage of, right? And it says, and I'm talking about by men. And so, Dr. Rogers says that some women avoided these kinds of encounters by relying on networks made up of female kin and acquaintances to purchase the goods that they wanted. Okay. So it says familial and friendship ties often provided women with the credit or money to finalize their transaction. So sometimes women use white women. And so, like you all just said, very strategic, very cunning, they're thinking. Sometimes they use networks. So it may be their brothers, their uncles, or their sons. And so they may have done that. Or sometimes women had a network of their own where it was either, females inside of the family or outside of the family, and that they would, utilize that network in order to secure goods. So then she goes on. I love how in the middle of page 87, it says Hardigan O'Connor has argued that power was part of every transaction. I was like, wow. Power was a part of every transaction. And it says the roles individuals played within those collaborations shaped the power they had over the transaction. Some held the purse, right? The purse strings. Others performed the legwork, balanced commands and budgets. Still others provided opinions, solicited and unsolicited, about the goods, shops, and money. So I put like an asterisk next to that power was a part of every transaction during the buying and the selling of enslaved people. And at the bottom, I'm going to end with this. It says slave owning women frequently hired their slaves to or purchase them from neighbors and friends. In such arrangements may well have been executed in the home rather than in the slave market. And Sister Marcia, you talked about that earlier. All right. Did anyone want to talk about, page 88 or take it from here?
I think for me, I think what stood out in this was like this, oh, how do I want to say it? This network. I kept wondering, like, how long did it really take them to sort of create this network? Because networks don't just pop up. But I'm like, how, with the women, to try to create this like side system to ensure their like safety in their finances and like their own private economy. Essentially, like they were creating a separate economy to protect their stuff. Like how, and I guess because they were home and they weren't really out like working, I guess they could just kind of network with other women and just kind of set this up and like get this going. But it just really, I just sat back and kind of wondered like how hard was it for them to create this side system with like other women, to get it going, to make it kind of fluid and to flow seamlessly. Because at this point, it seems like it's kind of a seamless system. It's just an understanding. So, but it's just a thought that I had.
I think that's a good point.
Really good point.
I think when the husband was away, the women came together to play and plan. And this is the thing that because they realized when the husband, as we learned in this chapter, he went away for long periods of time to go buy and sell and handle trade, slave business. So I'm sure women were looking and saying, hey, how can I protect myself? Just in case he don't come back. We have cases that Marianne down the street, her husband got up and left her, and she was destitute within six years. So what can we do in order to make sure we are in a better setting? And I think this is the beginning of how they created laws or combined their energy and their well-being to start to demand things later on. We may have not gotten there in this chapter yet, but I think you just hit a key point to understand when they started to band together.
Absolutely. And I know on page 88, she moves into, she drives home the point again that, the slave market and the slave holding household were one and the same. She said enslaved people's testimony reveals that there was little separation between home and work for the men engaged in the slave trade. But this is a good segue into the next couple of pages where they talk about some white men quit the slave trade. Some white men got involved in the slave trade and realized, man, this is too much. I'm away from, my wife and my children. And they were like, I'm out. I started thinking about the men in my family who are truck drivers. And my uncle, he's always, I want to get home to my wife. I got to get a job. So some of these men was just like, I'm out of here, and they actually, quit. I know on page 89, she talks about a particular slave trader, Isaac Franklin, who was a slave trader. They said one of the richest Americans in the country before his death in 1839. And he made his money off of slave trading. But he left once he made his money, he said, I'm out of it. And there were some men who did, who definitely left. And then there were some women who filed for divorce. They were like, this is too much. You're always gone. One guy was writing his wife a letter. They were going back and forth, and the wife and children, I think eventually she left or he left. I know that the marriage dissolved because it was just too much time spent apart. So I think one of you, I don't know if it was Sister Marcy or Brother T, one of you had brought that up, that they were gone, a lot of the times. But these marriages, but I love how Dr. Rogers talked about how slave trading even impacted, the marriages between, white men and white women. So everyone was really impacted by slave trading, but I never ever heard anybody talk about it from that perspective, like between white men and white women, how sometimes slave trading led to the dissolvement, I guess, of their marriage. So at the top of page 90, I have an asterisk here where it said Ebenezer Johnson's wife frequently accompanied her husband on slave trading and kidnapping excursions. I said, wow, I never heard. I don't know if anybody want to describe this, but you all can take it. But I was just like, I said, wow, she went with him. So when he was kidnapping, and trading, she was right there for it all, you know. But can someone talk about or describe the group of people that was actually going around? They were going around and kidnapping folks, kidnapping people, you know what I mean, and selling them and trading them. So can someone take it from there? Top of page 90.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. I think I had that highlighted too, Dr. Ma'at. And it goes on chapter 2 on page 90. It says Ebenezer Johnson, wife frequently accompanied her husband on slave trading and kidnapping. I guess she said she was not staying home like the other wives. She's going to help as much as she can. So this goes on to say that slave trading and kidnapping excursions, Johnson was a member of the notorious group that operated near our neck of the woods on Delaware and Maryland border, kidnapping indentured and free people of color from the north and selling them to slavery in the south. This is something. These men committed their crimes under the leadership of Patty Cannon and her son-in-law Joseph Johnson. Ebenezer was Joseph's brother, one of the gang members, and Samuel Scump, a fugitive slave from New Jersey who was one of Ebenezer's captive victims, testified to seeing Ebenezer's wife accompany him on several such ventures. So that was a eyewitness that showed that this slave catcher had his wife with him. So this is the first time I heard this when I read it as well, Dr. Ma'at. So this is something. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde type of thing.
Yeah, and they never show that. This is
Not at all.
never depict. That's why, man, I see why the old folks used to say, believe what they say. None of what you hear, half of what you see, something along those lines. Either, or is it none of what you saw, half of what I may have got it backwards, but I know it's along those lines. Believe nothing that you hear and half of what you see. And so I see why the older folks used to say stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like we sit there looking at these movies of slavery, and so we have, so what that did was it put a lot of myths. It put a lot of myths about slavery, or a lot of misconceptions that we have about slavery in our minds, until we read something like this and you're like, wait a minute, it didn't happen like that. But because we've been groomed to believe, I mean, even down to, and later on in the chapter, we'll get to that, when one of the these two white women were trying to sell an enslaved a sister, and she was a mother, she had children, and they were trying to sell her off, and she was like, I ain't going nowhere. She was like, and they didn't sell her. They couldn't sell her because she was just like, when have you ever saw that, in one of the movies where the sister was like, what, you trying to sell me? No, I ain't going nowhere. I got kids here. I'm not going. And that's what she did. But these are stories or depictions that we see. So anyway, at the middle of page 90, I love that Dr. Rogers drives home that white women were very indifferent. They didn't care, about, they didn't see our ancestors as humans. They grew up in this slave culture. So they didn't care. Like they didn't feel anything. You know how, like, when something happens to another human being, you have a feeling, you feel something. They didn't feel anything. She says, on rare occasions when we do hear the voices of slave traders' wives, we find that these women exhibited far more concern about their husbands' long absences from home than the fact that their husbands sold human beings for a living. Right? It says the absence and the uncertainties of the market proved to be more than some women could hear. They believed that slave trading had changed their husbands into men they hardly knew, and they sought to end their marriage to spouses who appeared as strangers to them. So they didn't even really care that they were trading human beings. These women didn't care. That's why I said Karen was never innocent. They didn't care. They were on kidnapping and slave trading excursions with their husbands, right? They're building networks where they're buying and selling enslaved people, right? They're in coffee shops drinking tea with their legs closed. Legs, cross your legs, crossing their legs, right? And they were mad at their husbands, not for selling human beings, William. They weren't mad about that. They were mad because he was gone too long. So that's why I said Karen was never innocent. Top of page 91, it says women were equally concerned with the pecuniary threats that their husbands slave trading posed even on their slave holdings. But I kind of didn't understand why she mentioned this, because I feel like in previous chapters, she drove that point home, right? That these women did not want what their husbands had going on, whether it was slave trading, whether it was business, other businesses. They set up separate estates, and they wanted to make sure that their husbands, dealings, whatever business dealings, did not interfere with their business dealings. So I didn't understand. I kind of felt like this was repetitive. But did anyone want to speak to that? At all, or you all kind of want to bypass it? Because I think like 2 weeks ago we talked about that, and so I know she spent maybe a page or two talking about that and giving some examples. Did anyone want to speak to that, or are we going to continue?
I think, again, maybe her point is just to drive home that, it's really difficult to get people who are in denial to understand that this really be going on. So, like, maybe it's not for us. Maybe it's just for the people who are still in denial at this point that this is still going on. That's the only thing I can think of, because it was kind of repetitive for me, and I believe it the first time. But I'm thinking about the people who would be reading this book that are in complete denial about the existence of all this information, but she's continuing to show receipts that this happened, and she's going to continuously probably bring this up, is what I'm going to assume. But yeah, I'm good with not talking about it.
Okay. All right. So I'm at the bottom of page 92, where she talks about, and I put in the margins, the movie Django. Did everyone on this panel see Django? Yeah, I thought about Django when she wrote this paragraph, as I read this paragraph. So it says slave traders and speculators were neighbors or members of the family, and they brought their trade into the homes of their friends and kin. Okay. So it says right here, speculators also routinely stayed with people they knew while traveling, into the lower South, or passed through plantation estate to rest as they made their way to the slave markets. Okay. So it says also, I'm at the top of page 93. The itinerant traders did more than sleep and rest while they visited estates throughout the South. They brought and sold slaves from their hosts while they were there. And so I was thinking about the movie Django. You know how they were he was lying about, buying, Mandingo warrior fighter. And so you had people who would come, they entertained them with, let's bring out our guests, let's have dinner, somebody playing the violin, people doing all sorts of stuff, and then they were showing off, their captives, and they would, discuss, they were bargaining. And so as I read this, my mind went to Django, because all of this was depicted in the movie Django. But this is what they did. So people, slave traders, would travel with enslaved people. They would go to plantations. They would rest. They would also trade in these homes, and they did all sorts of stuff. I think on page 93, one thing that jumped out on me, I'm at the bottom of the first paragraph, where they were saying that this young boy was sold, and he got sold, and then he died maybe a month or two after he got sold. And at the bottom, it said Mary sued Morrow for breach of warranty. So I said, golly, they were selling our ancestors and they had a warranty on it. Just like a car, Sister Marcia. You know what I mean? Like, oh, if it's bad, you got 30 days to return it. It was, or 5 years, we'll fix it up into. So literally, like it said, they sued because of a breach of a warranty. And I was like, wow, they actually, warranties came with people back then. Here's a young boy. Oh, he'll last you 5 years. You'll at least get good 3 to 5 years out of him. And when that didn't happen, when the little boy died, they sued. So that just further drove home to me that our ancestors were viewed and treated as property. I'm at the top of page 94 now, where it talked about. It says formerly enslaved people also spoke of occasions when their owners sold them in slave markets of their own making and bid them off in venues they organized on their estate for that very purpose. And so, typically we think that, when people bought and sold enslaved people, that they went to a brick and mortar or a spot out on a street where there was an auctioning block and somebody was on a stage and they were being auctioned off. But that wasn't the case. Sometimes right at the plantation, they had slave markets there. Um, at the bottom of that, this the second paragraph on page 95, 94, I put while in the margin, because typically when they depict the auctions, they show us being, physically inspected. So someone's looking at your mouth, they're looking at your arms, they're looking at, for women, your breasts. For males, it may be your genitalia. For women, they're looking maybe at your buttocks. They're looking at how strong you are, how healthy you are. But Dr. Rogers said at auctions, they put on theatrical performances. I said, what in the world? So it says, that, it says Sadia Hartman has called the slave auction the theater of the marketplace because enslaved captors forced them to perform roles that made them appear to be white Southerners' ideal slaves. Under the threat of violence, they fabricated life stories and feigned fitness, pleasure, and contentment before an audience of prospective purchasers. Although these kinds of performances are typically associated with sale in slave markets that were located in cities and towns, they also occurred in auctions on plantations, estates, and farms. Like I said, wow. So they were actually it was like a play, it was like a theater, and I never heard that before. Does anyone else want to, chime in? What were your thoughts when you read that?
I remember, and you brought up.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I'm William. Just 1 second, but I remember you brought up a point out my.
I was just going to say that when I was reading this, it kind of showed me how white people.
Mhm.
Hold on, he was talking.
No,
I think the internet crossed.
Oh
up.
yeah. So it's probably a delay. Probably a delay.
Yeah, let William talk. I think you have a delay. Go ahead.
William, go ahead. Brother T just going to yield the floor to you. I think you was delayed. He was talking and then you were delayed and then it cut him off. But he's just saying, go ahead and make your point.
That was just Sensei.
Yeah, that was just Sensei. Hold on, let me see.
Oh, just Sensei. My fault.
Yeah, that was just Sensei. Just Sensei, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so you go ahead and finish your thought.
Oh, okay. Something I was going to say was when I was reading this, my thought process was kind of how white people view this as like disposable and replaceable. And like if something bad happened to us, they could easily just find somebody else to fill in our spot, which kind of makes it seem like black people weren't as, I don't know how to probably say it, valuable, I guess, as like other human beings were being viewed. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you for that. Brother T.
Yeah, that was a good point because it was indispensable, especially when they talked about the warranty. That was crazy. Just thinking about that, thinking about this this ancestor will last 5 years. Um, but going on page 34, they talked a lot about skill, and it made me think about your comparison, Dr. Ma'at, when you talked about Django. Um, if you remember in that movie, when they came over to the house, they were dancing. They were like you say, putting on a show. They showing that they was well cultured, right? So it was appealing. Like everyone wanted to show just how good their servants were. Um, so later on in this chapter, on this page, at page 34, they talked about. Um,
94 or you on 34?
I'm sorry, 94. My
Okay, I just want
apologies,
okay. I wanted to pick sure we go ahead, brother T.
because I will go all the way back. But
That's what I was like. He's on 34 or 94 because I know you.
right, page 94. We talk about Annie Poole. Annie Poole trained the slaves she owned and sold them to the highest bidder. She was not married to the slave trader or a speculator. Um, this great word. She did not approach the men of the trade who walked past her estate so that she could buy one or more of the slaves in her coffers. Nor did she send males, family members, friends, or business associates to the local market to buy or sell for her. She transformed her backyard into a slave market with its own auction block to boot. So it just shows you they brought people to their house. They didn't have to go walk far and wide. They did everything where they were, where they stood, and they used their connections to do so. But they made sure they sold trade. I know you made the point, Dr. Ma'at, of them looking at the features, making sure that they were strong, they were healthy, but they trained them in certain things, so they were appealing to people as well. So that's one thing that I kind of picked up from that part of the page on page 94, that they trained them in what they want, what other people may have needed, which would have made them go to the highest bidder. They knew exactly how trained they were in certain skills.
Um,
Absolutely.
I just wanted to make a quick remark just about how I viewed this point of the having the slaves perform in the auctions and stuff. White people really tried their best to live out this fantasy of like they're superior and they are the best of the best and stuff because they don't have any culture. White was made up. And in order to fit this white stereotype and stuff, they wanted the best slaves. They wanted their slaves to act a certain way. They couldn't just act in any specific way. They really wanted them to put on a show to feed their egos.
Hold on, I gotta drop a bomb for brother T. That was
Yeah, drop a bomb.
that might be a YouTube clip, brother T. That might be a YouTube, Instagram clip. Like she went in just now. She's like, hold up. At the end of the day, this is what it really was, Dr. Ma'at and panel, right? This is what it really was. This is about feeding the ego. They don't have any culture. The whole concept of whiteness was made up. And this is what they did to feed their ego. So I just had to drop a bomb for Taryn. All right. So the page 95, it talked about, I just put in the margins culture, right? Where it says, nothing connected with the business was strange or unfamiliar because they spent their lives immersed in slavery, even in its most appalling details. I grabbed that line that I read, and they was brought up in the culture, right? So they didn't see anything wrong with what was happening. And I love that she reiterated that. These white women didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing because they were brought up in the culture. That's why I remember one time Jalen and I, we were out and about somewhere, and I think we were probably around the way. I think we went to Checkers or Burger King. It was some brothers out there, brother T, and they were sagging, and you know how it is, brother T. You around the way, you know how it is. And so Jalen didn't grow up like that, and so he was sitting in the car looking, and he said, "Oh my God, my ears! Oh my, I'm losing brain cells listening to them, and oh my, why is this pain?" And I said, Jalen, I said, son, I said, don't judge those brothers. They just grew up in a different culture than you. In their culture, where they grew up and the culture in their neighborhood. It's okay to speak the way they speak. It's okay to dress the way they dress. It's okay. You were brought up in a different household culture, right? A different way of life. And so you're looking at them and and I said they might look at you and say, man, this dude is corny, he's square. You know what I mean? Like, so I was telling him, you don't want to judge, you don't want to judge. You just have to understand that, sometimes, people don't know any better because of the culture that they were brought up in. You know what I mean? They don't see everybody around them speak the same way, they dress the same way, they're doing the same thing. So people don't see anything wrong with that. And so that's why in the margins I put culture. These women, it says nothing connected with the business. It says, I'm sorry, Joel's High's mistress. Nothing connected with the business was strange or unfamiliar because they spent their lives immersed in slavery, even in its most appalling details. Even people who are gangbangers. That's the like we sit there and people will say, well, oh, why you join a gang? And oh, why this? And oh, but in their neighborhoods, that's their way of life. They grew up in it. So they don't see anything wrong with it, Brother T. And I think that we really don't understand that culture dictates psychology, psychology dictates behavior, right? And so when you grow up in a certain cultures produce certain ways of thinking, thus certain ways of behaving. Okay. And so what I try to do and with folks now, and I guess this came with in my older age, is I try to understand people. I don't try to rush to judge folks. I may have some feelings about what they're doing, their behaviors. I might say, oh, I don't agree with that. But I also try to understand people, their upbringing. Why do they do what they do? You know what I mean? Why does so and so behave the way they behave? Why do they think the way they think? What experiences that they have that shape their thought process? You know what I mean? And the way they behave. So anyway, these white women just did not have they were indifferent. They grew up in this stuff. So I wanted to drive that point home about culture there. And then in the middle of the bottom of page 95, it says not all women engaged in such elaborate and orchestrated affairs when they wanted to buy or sell enslaved people. Far more women brought and sold slaves privately. And this was Sister Marcy was talking about, and have therefore often escape historian notice. She talked about that earlier. You know, it says slave sales involving women might also remain obscure if the sales were rescinded. So there were times, and we kind of touched on this earlier, where sometimes they may have sold an enslaved person and then they may came back and say, give me her back because of something. It could be anything. It could be mistreatment of the enslaved person or whatever. But for some reason, the sale was rescinded. At the bottom of page 96, it says white slave owning women also negotiated with enslaved people who hoped to buy their freedom or liberty of their loved ones, sales that constituted another aspect of the slave market activities. And when I read this, I started thinking about the genius of our people, how our ancestors were intelligent. Our ancestors weren't dumb. They knew what was going on. And they were able sometimes, Sister Marcia, to manipulate what was going on for things to work out in their favor. They actually negotiated, contracts, even though they said that slaves weren't legally able to participate in a contract. At times they did, and it was, I guess it was probably contractual, like a verbal contract, but it was times where they would buy their freedom. For example, they talked about one brother who bought his freedom for $1,000, but he knew what his value was, and he knew that at that particular time, if his mistress would have sold him, somebody would have paid $1,000 for him, and he was saving up his money, and he ended up paying $1,000 and getting his freedom. And sometimes people did that. But that required knowledge of the slave market, the slave economy, right? And I think I drove home with the slave economy. It's on page 97. It says the slave market economy consisted of slave auctions and sales, inheritance or debt collection, and self-purchase. So they had to understand these things. They had to understand the value, right? They had to look at the skills that they were coming, that they had, and they had to assess their value in order to negotiate. And so I know he talked about that. And so it says slave sale comprised of skills, character, sex, an appraised market value. That's at the middle of page 99. And so they had to understand all of these things so that they were able to assess their value in order to negotiate buying their freedom. Did anyone want to chime in on any of these pages?
You put a book. That's a big point. You went from 98. You summed it up pretty good, all the way up to 99. So we slapped dead right when the Dred Scott decided to purchase his freedom. If anybody wanted to go into that, but when Dred Scott decided to purchase his freedom, and that his wife and children, he was unable to offer his mistress, Irene Emerson, full payment. He approached her and proposed to give her a down payment and pay the rest in installments. He even secured a reputable co-signer who vouched for him, and he was willing to ensure that Scott would fulfill his agreement. But Emerson rejected his offer, and this was eventually the consequence of her decision. The nation, throughout 1856 and 1857, watched one of the most important U.S. Supreme Court cases defining the relationship between race and citizenship unfold. So, as we saw in the previous part of the chapter, our brothers and sisters raise up enough money to negotiate the sale. But in this historic account of Dred Scott, this is what we know. They went to the Supreme Court. He was unable to secure the sale of his loved ones. So as I want you to pay close attention to the year, say 1856, 1857, 20 years, right? 20 years from 1837, the panic. So as we mentioned before, they intricately secured their power every year up until this point. To the mistress built a network. She built a power structure that she could now enforce contracts and also protect her contracts. So she did have power all through this whole thing. I think we talked about the power dealings earlier in the chapter as well. So you see almost 30 years of this history was within its pages on how she secured, how she sold, how she traded, and how she conducted her slave dealings.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Sister Marcia, I see you wanted to say
One thing
something.
I just wanted to mention here as I was reading this, it stood out to me that I wanted to be sure that the young people, whether they're watching or the young people that are here that I teach that are, with me, I wanted them to see how powerful and empowering it is when you know your value. Had these captives just kind of like, I want to buy my freedom, without having any sense of what their value is. I don't know if the negotiation or even the contractual ability to try to even get their freedom would have been possible. Knowing what his value was, he was able to even get ahead of it and start saving and then approach before she could change her mind and up her price. He was already there. He was like, bet $1,000, I got that. Like, let's do it. So think like as we come to the table, when we go to negotiate our salaries, or if you're starting a business and you're trying to put value on your product, it is important to understand your value and know what you bring to the table, because it's extremely empowering when you are paid or when you negotiate a price that is fair and what you deserve. So let's learn from that.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to say I should have dropped a bomb for you, Sister Marcia, because I tell my students that. I said, you all, you're electrical engineers, you're rare. And they jump at you and say, I'll pay you 80, I'll pay you 90. Even I'll give you an example, internship. So some of my students, and I know what the ongoing price is right now. I know what the market price is for interns and electrical engineers, really $40 an hour. That's what they get paid. So some of my students came in, oh, Doc, BG&E offered me a job, making $25 an hour. I said, $25 an hour. I said, did you negotiate that? Oh, I mean, Doc, $25 an hour is good, don't you think? man, I said, they're treating you like college students who don't know any better. I said, you could actually get, about 40. I said, the going rate for a sophomore going into a rising junior, an electrical engineer, right? Who's coming in, understanding how to design and analyze electric circuits. They understand Python programming, and you've taken higher level mathematics such as calculus 1, calculus 2, and differential equations. Your going rate right now is about $40 to $41 an hour. Oh, Doc, really? Yes. So you go back to BG&E and you tell them, hey, I entertained your offer, but here's my counter offer, and see if they will accept your counter offer. Know your worth. Know your worth. And I even went as far as this, Sister Marcia. I said, when you all get out here, they pay you roughly about 80, 90K a year. And you all jump at it. Oh, Doc, they pay me 80,000. You all think this is big money. And I started breaking it down. I said, well, 30% is gone, right? You don't own any property. You don't have any dependents. 30% is gone. So 30% of your 80,000 has turned into about $56,000. Okay. Now I have to pay rent, right? Because I know you want to get out. You want to get your own place, right? So you have $56,000. So in Baltimore right now, and if you want a really nice 2-bedroom apartment, you're going to pay in a nice neighborhood, you're going to pay about $2,000 a month, right? 2,000 times 12, that's 24,000. 56,000 minus 24,000. Now you're at 32,000. Well, wait a minute. Out of that 32,000, I might have a car note, right? That I'm paying $500 plus my insurance plus gas and maintenance. So let's put $1,000 away per month, right? So where are we at? 30? Where am I? That's at 30. What did I say? 32,000, right?
32,000.
32,000. So then I have a car note, right? That's 1,000 a month, 12,000 gone. So 32,000 minus 12. Then I'm at 20,000. Well, what about my gas and electric, food, cable, cell phone bill? I said, by the time you pay all of your bills, you're going to be left with $10,000. Now, do you think that $80,000 is a lot of money? And they sat back, they looked at me. Oh, Doc, I didn't think about that. Right. Know your worth. I said, do you know these people are government contractors, meaning they're government defense contractors. So they're getting paid $300 an hour that they're billing for a project that you're on, and they're giving you $80K a year. I got a buddy that walked away. He was making $56,000 for Northrop Grumman. He's making $300K a year right now, doing contractual work. No, like you said, Sister Marcia, know your worth. And it's no disrespect to anybody who's not making 80,000. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is these kids are getting lowballed out here. They're paying thousands of dollars, Brother T, to learn, hard skills. And these companies are undercutting them because they don't know their value.
That's right. I always say that the most unused app on these expensive phones is the calculator. We just don't use the addition. 1 + 1 is 2. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, which is amazing to me, that this ancestor mustered up $1,000 in the 1800s. I only can imagine what $1,000 would be worth today. And the number two, what did he do in order to amass $1,000 in the late 1800s, right? So it's just like you said, he understood exactly the skill set, how much she would sell him for. So he had to go to the high end. So he had to really realize I can't come to her with 500. I can't come to her with 600 because she can sell me for more and more. I have to have $1,000 or more. I'm just wondering. I think one of the comments in the chat also, like, what did he do to get that type of money? So it wasn't mentioned what he actually did. Just it was amazing that he knew exactly his worth and what she would take.
Absolutely. He probably did side work. Frederick Douglass talked about that in Narrative of a Slave. Sometimes they just did some side work, and they would give him a couple of dollars. And remember, he said in the book that technically his money belonged to his mistress. He just didn't give it to her. So sometimes they do side work and give them a couple of dollars. You know what I mean? So sometimes, and Frederick Douglass talked about that. Remember when he was working on the docks down in Fells
Good
Point?
point.
Sometimes that he was saying that he was hired out, but he was saying sometimes he did some side work and they would give him a couple of dollars for it.
Right. We have to remember also, and just remember that story you just told me, the year, and realizing what was being done during that year, because we assumed through slavery they still was just working on the plantation. So I had to put in my mindset, okay, 1837, 1847. This is a year that they were actually working other places. So yeah,
No,
got you.
absolutely. And this is the last page, and then we're finished, guys. So during the last page, this was a sad story. It was a sister who it was a mistress who owned like 5 of her children. This is on page 100. And she, it was a sister, she had 5 children, and her mistress was, I think she mustered up money to like buy her freedom. I might be butchering the story, but I believe that she bought her freedom, but this mistress still owned like 5 of her children. And she said what her mistress did was send her like on a long trip, and when she came back, she said one of her children was behind the mistress crying. But the mistress was sitting there counting money, like $10, $20, $30, $40. And then so her child was crying and said, brother money. I guess that was brother money. You know how they say she kept it in the way that the ancestors said it, but the child yelled out, brother money, right? And so the woman asked, like, did you sell my child? You get what I'm saying? You sold, because she was just selling her children. And she said, yes, Charity. And I got a great price for him. And I was just like, evil. I think that's what I wrote in my margins. I wrote in my margins, evil, right in my margins. Like, she didn't even care. She didn't care that these were this woman's children. She just kept selling them, and it was, and they again, this further substantiates that there was just no connection, emotional connection to what they were doing. She saw nothing wrong with it, selling this woman her children. So anyway, it says at the bottom, because I was wondering when she was going to bring it home, because the actual title of this chapter is She Thought She Could Find a Better Market. So I said, when is she going to bring this home? So she brought it home in the last paragraph. It says, within the confines of her household, Charity Bowen's mistress, and this is the woman who sold her children, it says, thought about selling and finally did sell her slaves to men who traded in human flesh. It was here in the household that Bowery approached her and attempted to negotiate a price which to buy her children and establish the terms of payment for them. But she wouldn't take her money. She just sold it to a slave trader. So it says it was also here that the slave-owning woman calculated the value of those human beings and repeatedly rejected offers for their freedom because she thought she could find a better market in which to sell them. White women in the South understood the darkest dimensions of the market and people firsthand in the transaction that took place in their homes and among their friends and family, equipped them to initiate and finalize their own within and outside formal slave marketplaces. So this concludes, this concludes our discussion of chapter 4. Chapter 5 says wet nurse for sale or hire. So I'm looking forward to discussing chapter 5. So family, that concludes our discussion tonight. We just finished discussing chapter 5 of They Were Her Property by Dr. Stephanie Jones Rogers. Make sure you grab this book, family. It's an eye-opening book, and we're halfway through, y'all. Like we began this journey, like we're halfway through. It's only 8 chapters, and so next week, we're on chapter 5, and let me see how many pages this book is. This book is about, and I'm not counting the notes and all of that, and the epilogue. I'm not going to count the epilogue. Oh, it's 199 pages, and we're already on page 101. So, I know William, like, you up there, there's still a long ways to go, William said. I don't know. I'm talking about, we almost done. It's not that much. We're like another 100 pages, but we're almost finished discussing this book. And I can honestly say it definitely was an eye-opener for me. I'm looking forward to discussing chapter 5 next week. Does anyone have any closing words for the listening audience?
I was wondering if you can get in contact with the author, Dr. Ma'at, and have it on for the last discussion. That would be nice.
Okay, I'll reach out to Dr. Rogers. I tried to reach out to her for an interview when her book first came out, and I couldn't get her. But what I'm hoping is now that her it kind of died down. Nobody's really checking for the book like that no more.
Okay.
I hope that she's willing because people were trying to grab her. She was, her book was flying off the shelf and she was everywhere. And so I just think that it's not that she ignored me on purpose. I think she was just pulled in a lot of different directions. And so now that things have died down for her, I'm going to reach out to her and see if she can join us. So beautiful idea, Brother T. And I'll keep everybody posted on that. I think it'd be wonderful if she could join us for the last discussion. So I'll definitely look into that. But yeah, next week is are we meeting? I'm not really, Easter, I'm good. If y'all still want to meet, I know some people say it's Easter, Dr. Mai. I'm good with meeting at 7:00. I'm not, I no longer subscribe to the religion. And so I'm good to go. You good to go, Brother T?
I'm good though.
Okay, all right. Just making sure everybody good to go. Sister Marcy, are you good to go, or y'all gonna be doing an Easter egg hunt? No, I'm just playing.
I'm not gonna be doing no Easter egg hunt. I think I'm gonna visit my dad up during the day just because he's here and available, so I gotta catch him when I can.
Absolutely.
But I think we should be back by 7, so I'm gonna plan to do it. Jacente, I know you're at your dad, so you can have the week off because I know you're going to go visit your dad. But the rest of us should be here.
Okay, cool. All right, so next weekend, family, we will see you at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next week to discuss chapter 5 of They Were Her Property. Have a super black-tastic week. A Bibi Fahodie, Uhuru Sasa, Hotep